Alfredo Hernandez and Angela Alexus Pastorino were two 18-year-olds who were in love and inseparable. Alfredo was soft-spoken and often the first to help others, while Angela, who went by Angie, cared deeply for people and animals, especially dogs. They lived in Bend, Oregon, and by the summer of 2022, they had gotten engaged. Angie had also just earned her GED, and Alfredo was only one test away from earning his. However, on August 16, 2022, everything sadly changed. That afternoon, Angie and Alfredo were at a house on Mount Faith Place, helping the homeowner, Melissa Adams, with some remodeling. Angie knew Melissa because she'd been close friends with her daughter for years. Also living in the home was Melissa's boyfriend, 41-year-old Wesley Abel Brady. After finishing the work, the four of them began drinking and using cannabis, and for the most part, it seemed like everyone was getting along. But unbeknownst to the young couple, Melissa and Wesley had other plans and were hoping to convince Alfredo and Angie to have a sexual encounter with them. However, they were unaware that the young couple were extremely jealous of each other, which had led to frequent arguments in the past, and they had even been bickering that very night. By 3 a.m., Melissa was passed out on the couch, and Alfredo was extremely intoxicated and had just vomited nearby. He then walked outside and found Angie and Wesley sitting together on the back patio and flew into a rage. Wesley alleges that Alfredo tried to punch him, but was too drunk to make contact. At this point, Wesley decided for some reason to escalate the situation by grabbing a sawed-off trunk of a Christmas tree and hitting Alfredo over the head with it. The first blow stunned him. The second blow knocked him to the ground, and then the third blow knocked Alfredo unconscious. Angie screamed and jumped on Wesley to try to protect Alfredo, but he retaliated by punching her several times before strangling her, which crushed her windpipe. He then duct-taped her mouth, which caused her to suffocate and die. Once she was dead, he watched Alfredo struggle for at least 2 hours before he also died. He then dragged their bodies into the garage. Later that day, when Angie and Alfredo failed to return home, a family member reported them missing. That night at around 11:15 p.m., Melissa found one of their bodies in the garage and called 911. When officers arrived, they discovered the second body. While investigators were at the scene, Wesley returned home and was subsequently arrested and charged with 3 felonies, as well as strangulation, first-degree sodomy, first-degree sex abuse, first-degree abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. Yes, you heard that right. Wesley sexually abused one of the corpses. Investigators also discovered that he'd strangely driven to some property he owned in Christmas Valley, about 95 miles away. Officers searched the property, but nothing was found, and it remains unclear why he went there. This wasn't Wesley's first run-in with the law. Years earlier, he was suspected of torturing and killing dogs, but was never charged. In 2018, he broke into the home of Thomas McCann, set several fires inside, and stole some items. He later pleaded no contest to arson and burglary, and received 5 years of probation, was required to get mental health treatment, and was banned from ever owning animals. In 2023, Melissa sold the Mount Faith Place home. The following month, in February 2023, Wesley pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder and strangulation for the deaths of Alfredo and Angie. He was then sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. About a year later, Angie's mother and Alfredo's brother filed a $14 million civil lawsuit against Wesley and Melissa. The lawsuit alleges assault, battery, negligence, and wrongful death, and is based on information from the police investigation. The lawsuit also claims that Melissa had been Wesley's girlfriend, roommate, and at one time his mental health counselor. It alleges that she knew or should have known about his violent behavior, the teen's vulnerability, and the dangers in her home that night. As of December 2025, the wrongful death suit has not been resolved. Margit Gergovics Schuller was born on June 21, 1953, in Gardeny, Hungary. She went on to become a cardiac nurse and then married Josef Schuller. They had a daughter and moved to the United States in 1982 when she was around 7 years old, and eventually settled in Beaufort, South Carolina, where Josef joined the U.S. Navy. By the age of 34, Margit and Josef were living with their 12-year-old daughter at the Palmetto Apartments on Harding Street in Burton, South Carolina. Margit was working as a registered nurse at Dr. Herbert Kieserling's office, and Josef was still in the Navy. In the fall of 1987, while Josef was away in San Diego for training, tragedy sadly struck the family. On November 1st, at around 8 p.m., Margit took some laundry to the building's laundry room and then strangely never returned. After a while, her daughter went to check on her and sadly found her shot to death. The shot hadn't initially killed her, and she managed to crawl out of the laundromat before dying under a tree outside. When investigators arrived, they saw a trail of blood that went from the laundry room to the far end of the apartment complex. The blood came from the killer after being injured during the attack, but even with that, they were still unable to locate him. In the years after the shooting, deputies identified several persons of interest, but forensic limitations at the time meant they couldn't definitively connect anyone to the crime. In 1989, 2 years after Margit's murder, construction workers at a new hotel site on Highway 21 found a French-made .22 caliber pistol near Robert Smalls Parkway. The gun had no record because it had been stolen, but ballistics confirmed it was the murder weapon. Still, there was not enough evidence to identify a suspect. In 1999, fluid recovered from the scene was analyzed for DNA, and a profile of an unknown male subject was eventually developed. The DNA profile was entered into CODIS, but no matches were found. In 2019, detectives enlisted the help of Parabon Nanolabs, and using the suspect's DNA, they created 3D sketches of what the shooter might have looked like at ages 25 and 55, both with and without facial hair. From there, the DNA profile was used for genetic genealogy. 6 years later, in 2025, investigators were finally able to identify the killer as 76-year-old Cortez Sabino Lake. Lake was a Navy corpsman at the time of the murder and was stationed at Parris Island in Beaufort County. He lived only about 600 to 800 feet from the laundry room, but was not considered a suspect at the time. While in the Navy, he worked in the dental clinic before being discharged in 1988. After the murder, he worked as a respiratory therapist at Buford Memorial Hospital and later retired. He also had a minimal criminal history. After being identified, investigators tried to question him, but he refused to cooperate, so they obtained a search warrant to obtain his DNA, and about a week later, they confirmed the match. He was then arrested on November 18, 2025, and charged with Margit's murder. Investigators believe Lake may have committed other crimes and hope that anyone he may have victimized will come forward after hearing about his arrest. The Beaufort County Sheriff's Office believes there may still be people with information about what happened on November 1, 1987. Even after nearly 40 years, any memory or detail could help the case. Anyone with information is urged to contact cold case investigator Bob Bromage at 843-817-8013. For those wishing to remain anonymous, tips can be submitted through Crime Stoppers of Beaufort County using the free P3 Tips app, online at tipsbft.com, or by calling 844-847-7238. At this time, Cortez Sabino Lake remains in jail awaiting the outcome of the case. In 2019, 25-year-old Ola Salem was living in the Rosebank area of Staten Island, New York, and was recently divorced from her husband. The marriage had been very tumultuous, and her husband had allegedly physically abused her on multiple occasions. The abuse was so bad that she had to have a protective order filed against him. He then retaliated by filing one against her. After the divorce, Ola's passion for helping women in similar situations brought her to volunteer at the ASEA Women's Center, where she herself had stayed before. In 2011, 17-year-old Ola and her family made the news after getting into an altercation at the Rye Playland amusement park in Rye, New York. The altercation began when she was denied entry to a ride because of the hijab she was wearing. This caused her father, Kabari Salem, and multiple other family members to get upset, and a fight broke out. It ended with 15 of Ola's family being arrested, including her father and 3 women. While she and her family felt they were being discriminated against, it's worth noting that the park has very strict rules on the ride she was trying to get on. The rule, which had always been in place, stated no hats, scarves, bandanas, or any loose fabric around the head or neck, which would include a hijab. The reason for this is that items around the head and neck could tighten and strangle a person due to the high speeds of the ride. 3 rides at the park have these rules: Catch a Wave, Crazy Mouse, and Dragon Coaster. However, Ola didn't see it that way and felt she had been religiously discriminated against, which led her down a path of activism. She and her family had migrated here from Egypt, and Ola grew up in Coney Island. Her father, Kabari, was a former Egyptian Olympic boxer called the Egyptian Magician and had boxed for Egypt in the 1992 and 1996 Olympics. In 1999, his career turned controversial when his opponent, Randy Carver, died after a match in Kansas City involving illegal headbutts. On October 23, 2019, Kabari brought Ola to Palmyra, Pennsylvania, to help paint his restaurant on Main Street, which he co-owned. After that night, she was never seen alive again. The next day, her body was sadly found covered by branches and leaves in Bloomingdale Park on Staten Island. Her clothing had also been disturbed, suggesting she had been sexually assaulted, but the sexual assault kit results came back negative. Investigators then theorized the killer had done that on purpose to throw off the investigation. In June of 2024, an autopsy showed that she had died from strangulation and blunt force trauma. After her body was discovered, her father was brought in for questioning. He said that he and Ola had traveled to Palmyra the day before her body was found to paint his restaurant. A little after 9 p.m., he said they got into a nasty argument, which he said made Ola very erratic. Also, he claimed that after the argument, she left the restaurant in her black sedan, and he never saw her again. He then told investigators some shocking information. He said that in the days leading up to her death, Ola had been complaining about being followed by an unknown person and suggested she might have gone back to her ex-husband. He claimed his daughter had mental health issues and was always paranoid. After the interview, investigators were once again shocked to learn that Kabari had strangely left the country. They realized why after the DNA results under Ola's fingernails came back and pointed right at him. Surveillance and GPS records also showed that he had been in the area where her body was found. They also found surveillance of him at a Lowe's buying a shovel. At that point, they knew the truth. Kabari had murdered his daughter. All that was left was to find him, but that would take way longer than the investigators were hoping. Kabari would remain on the run for over a year before being arrested in Cairo, Egypt in December 2020 with the help of Kuwaiti authorities. A few months later, he was extradited back to the United States and charged with Ola's murder. The actual motive behind the murder was Kabari's control and anger issues that had worsened due to Ola's divorce and growing independence. In the end, Kabari was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison. Sasha Samsudean was born on July 4, 1988, in New York City to Tara and Ken H. Samsudean, and grew up in Florida. In school, she was a member of the Dazzlers dance team and described as a vivacious and spirited young woman with an infectious personality. After graduating from Seminole High School in 2006, she earned a math degree from the University of Florida. She then became the media manager for Pearson and a local content writer for 407apartments.com and swamprentals.com. She also volunteered with the Apartment Association of Greater Orlando. By the age of 27, Sasha was living at the Uptown Place Apartments in Orlando and had a lot going for her, until a night out drinking with friends ended in a horrible tragedy. On October 16, 2015, Sasha went out with friends, including Anthony Roper, to the Attic Bar on East Pine Street in Orlando. At around 12:30 a.m., Sasha, who was now very intoxicated, decided to leave and walk home. Thankfully, 2 women passing by in an Uber saw her walking and thought she looked too intoxicated to reach her destination safely, so they stopped and picked her up. However, after being dropped off at her apartment, her friends and family never saw her alive again. Not long after, Sasha's friend Anthony began trying to reach her to see if she had made it home safely, but she wasn't answering. He continued calling and messaging her for the next few hours, before deciding to go to her apartment himself. Once there, he knocked on the door, but there was no answer. At that point, he called the police and requested a welfare check. When officers arrived and entered her apartment, they sadly found her body wrapped in her comforter. She'd been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. Her windpipe had been fractured, and she showed signs of blunt force trauma. At first, investigators believed Sasha knew her killer because there was no sign of forced entry. That's why they first looked at Anthony, who had requested the welfare check, but he was quickly ruled out as a suspect. A break in the case came when Sasha's upstairs neighbor spoke with police and said that while doing his laundry, he saw Sasha in the hallway with the building's security guard, Stephen Duxbury. Unfortunately, getting the surveillance footage from the building took time, but once they got it, it broke the case wide open. Over an hour and 15 minutes after Sasha left the bar, she can be seen on surveillance entering the building, followed moments later by an unknown man who notices how drunk she is and asks, "Are you okay?" To which she replies, "Yes, and thank you." She then disappears up the stairs. 2 minutes later, Duxbury can be seen on video walking around the building, apparently looking for Sasha after seeing her enter the building very intoxicated. Apparently, she had forgotten the digital key code to her apartment and was initially unable to get inside. Once Duxbury caught up to her, you can see him follow her around the building for the next 40 minutes, going to different floors and stairwells. During that time, he was also unlocking various doors that led down hallways with no cameras. At 2:26 a.m., she can be seen exiting the building before re-entering 6 to 7 minutes later. After that, she enters her apartment and is never seen alive again. When Duxbury was questioned, he said he encountered Sasha and 2 other women at the building's entrance. He said Sasha didn't have an ID or a key fob that would have given her access. Around the same time, an individual buzzed himself in, and Sasha followed. He said he had finished speaking with the other women and had gone inside to check on Sasha. He claimed he last saw her outside her apartment, fumbling with the key. He also strangely told investigators he left work at 6 a.m., but surveillance footage captured him still there at 6:36 a.m., still in his uniform, carrying a white garbage bag with red handles. While carrying a garbage bag might not be that unusual for a building employee, it's worth noting that garbage collection was not part of the security guard's job. As for the 2 women he spoke with outside, they were the Good Samaritans who had picked Sasha up in the Uber, and they left after she made it inside. At that point, investigators focused all their attention on Duxbury, and he was brought in for a second interview. He then agreed to take a polygraph and failed miserably on questions on whether or not he had ever been inside Sasha's apartment. It was then discovered that the soles of his boots matched the prints found at the scene, and that his phone's data had been strangely erased during a recent factory reset. On October 23rd, police obtained a search warrant for Duxbury's home and phone. They found that on October 17th, around 5 a.m., he had searched for ways to override a digital deadbolt lock, similar to the ones installed on the apartments inside the building. They also compared his fingerprints, which he had provided when he was hired as a security guard, to those found on the rim of Sasha's toilet and found a match. At that point, investigators knew they likely had their killer, but they needed to be sure, so they sent off DNA, and it positively linked Duxbury to the crime. On October 30th, Duxbury was arrested and charged with attempted sexual battery with a weapon or physical force and burglary of a dwelling with assault or death. During the trial, it was revealed that Sasha wasn't the first resident of the apartment building that Duxbury had stalked. In the end, he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 15 years for burglary. Yik Oe Huang was born on February 15, 1930, in China. She was married to Ho Wei Huang, and they had raised 4 children together. In 1986, the family moved to the United States to be closer to their daughter and grandchildren. After settling in San Francisco, Yik studied hard to become a U.S. citizen and then worked as a nanny and seamstress. They lived in a home in the Visitation Valley neighborhood, where Yik was known for taking daily walks and exercises at the Visitation Valley playground, just across from her house. She was also active in the Visitation Valley Friendship Club, where she helped other Chinese seniors with paperwork, food, and rental assistance. To the neighborhood's younger people, she was known as Grandma Huang. Sadly, her life was about to come to a senseless, tragic end. On the morning of January 8, 2019, 88-year-old Yik left her house around 6 a.m. to do her usual exercises at the playground across the street. She never returned and was never seen alive again. While at the playground, she was viciously attacked. Once she was unconscious and dying, the attacker walked to her home and began burglarizing it, but ran off when someone showed up. After being found, she was rushed to the hospital with a fractured skull, bleeding on the brain, and multiple broken bones in her face. While investigators couldn't locate the suspect, they did find a pool of blood near the entrance, along with a black glove and bloody napkin. 8 days later, another attack occurred in the same neighborhood. This time, a man reported being carjacked at gunpoint, only 6 blocks from where Yik and her family lived. 9 hours later, the man's vehicle was found abandoned at a gas station on San Bruno Avenue. It turned out to be the same suspect who attacked Yik. 3 days later, the same suspect robbed 2 teenagers of their phones. The first teen was a 14-year-old girl who'd been walking down Woolsey Street when the suspect rolled up on a bicycle and pointed a gun at her and stole her phone before fleeing. An hour later, the suspect approached a 17-year-old girl near the Muni station at Bell in St. Charles, punched her in the face, and took her phone before riding away. Thankfully, police were able to track one of the stolen phones to a house in the Sunnydale neighborhood, only a few blocks from where Yik had been attacked. On January 20th, 2019, 12 days after Yik was attacked, the suspect was identified as 25-year-old Keontae Gathron and subsequently arrested after being found hiding in a car. Using DNA, they were able to connect him to the carjacking, the stolen phones, and the attack and sexual assault on Yik. Sadly, within 5 days of being the 1-year anniversary of the attack, Grandma Huang died from her injuries. The medical examiner then ruled her death a homicide, caused by complications from multiple blunt force injuries. Gathron's charges were then upgraded from attempted murder to murder. In November 2025, Keontae Gathron was found guilty of murdering Yik and was sentenced to 2 life sentences, including one without the possibility of parole. For the other crimes, he received an additional 31 years in state prison to be served consecutively.